Hi everyone, welcome to Wandering DMs. I'm Paul.
And I'm Dan. On today's episode of Wandering DMs, we have very special guest, Epidiah Ravachol, who's the designer of the horror role-playing game Dread and creator of the e-zine Worlds Without Master, and also the designer on the newer role-playing game Wolfspell as well. Epidiah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So it's October, and it's so welcome to October, everybody. And so we have planned a number of spooky events and discussions for the month of October. So I think it's a great time to talk with Epidiah about Dread and Wolfspell. Now, first of all, Epidiah, I guess I have to ask my standard question to most of our guests when they come on, and that is, historically, how did you get started with role-playing games? What was the first role-playing game that you got started with personally?
Oh, okay. So I actually was having this discussion. I was talking to my wife about this the other day. So the first role-playing game I made characters for, because that happens before you actually play a game, was TSR's Conan in the early 80s.
Yep.
And yeah, it was a weird moment. Well, it was weird for a couple of reasons. Like, I was young at the time. My family used to live in Ohio, and then we moved to Wisconsin, and we had gone back to Ohio to visit with friends. But in the like we went back the year after to visit with friends, and it was this weird age gap where when I left, I was a kid. I was a young kid. We were playing with stuffed animals and things like that. When we returned, I brought my stuffed animals and then suddenly realized that nobody, because I was going back to my friends that I played stuffed animals with. I hadn't played stuffed animals in Wisconsin, but for some reason I thought I was going back to that time when I was younger, but everyone else was growing up at the same time. So I had this awkward, my childhood is dead moment, where I show up at my friend's house with all these stuffed animals, and I have this vivid memory of this event happening where they're because my friend was he invited a bunch of other friends that I knew to sort of surprise me when I arrived there, and so they all surprised me, and here I am holding stuffed animals, and nobody's looking to play that, and nobody wants to play this kind of pretend with me. And that was the beginning of that weekend, and by the end of that weekend we had the Conan role-playing game out, and we were making characters for it, and my brain was on fire with the idea of being I don't even know what I made. I don't know if it was a corsair who's going to whatever, just the idea of having this adventure character that I could be, it was sort of the passing of the torch of playing pretend, from how I used to as a kid too. And it wasn't until just this past week that I realized that both those events had to have happened in the same weekend, that this was connected in that way.
Wow.
Because I was watching, I don't know if you've seen the show Pen 15. On Hulu.
We love that show. We love that show.
Because there are moments in that show that feel exactly like that, right? They have their dolls or whatever, and they're just can we still play this? What's the negotiating that moment?
It's funny.
That is super. Boy, that got dark real fast. That is an intense. Thank you. That is an intense memory, and personally, I really feel that. That is an intense memory and an intense weekend, and kind of a lot to unpack. And so the funny thing is, at least in my house, I kind of go back and forth between that same issue, because my partner, who we refer to as disinvited artist Isabel Garbani, has a puppet show, right? And so frankly, right before the show started, Epidiah, I mentioned that we have kind of a joke website called whyouarenotgettingyourelephant.com, and that's specifically talking about stuffed elephants, because we had when my nephew was born, we tried to get we bought a stuffed elephant in order to send to my nephew, and then we couldn't bear to part with it. and we kept it, and it had, and so it suddenly had a name, and we were acting with it in our house. This is a couple of years ago, right? And we couldn't bear to part with it, so we bought a second stuffed elephant, right? Well, a day later, that one had a different name and a different character, and different voice, and we couldn't get rid of that one either, right? So we started accruing a larger and larger number of stuffed elephants here. And anyway, now she has a puppet show called Cow and COVID on YouTube. So actually, in this house, I tend to go back and forth between the D&D role-playing show and actually doing puppetry with the stuffed elephants that we have. So I very deeply feel connected to, I think, the fairly small number of people that still feel what it's like to feel that your stuffed animals are alive, because we're a household that believes that quite strongly. So I feel that. Sorry, viewers, that was not what you were expecting today when you tuned in to DMs, but that's what you're getting.
Serious exercising of demons here on the Wandering DMs. Never thought that would happen. Honestly, Epidiah, your story actually evokes for me memory of when I was introduced to D&D. I was frankly too young for it and didn't really appreciate it. It was my older brother who first really got into it, and he had to kind of help me bridge that gap. I definitely remember him playing games with me that were really, frankly, very borderline between just, very juvenile, let's pretend, and like, okay, now you have a piece of paper, write down your name on it, and now there are numbers. Like, he definitely kind of stepstoned me across that gap, which is really fascinating.
That older sibling thing. Like, I'm the oldest in my family. Well, okay, so with this group of friends I had back home, the one that brought D&D, well, it wasn't D&D, it was the Conan game, but the one that brought role-playing to the group, he, all the rest of us were sort of like the oldest kids in our family, and he had an older brother. So he brought role-playing games, he brought the V. I don't know if you've ever seen the V television series.
Yeah, that was terrifying. That was absolutely terrifying to me as a child.
Yeah,
heavy metal. Like his older brother was like we'd see the Iron Maiden posters in his room and be like, "What's going on?" I think he had a tarantula. It was just very like. But that sort of almost oral tradition of obviously role-playing games are an oral tradition where we're playing them out loud with each other. Maybe you can play them in text chats and things like that, but like as they began. But we don't realize that that's quite how most of the rules kind of get passed along, right? Like, because we get textbooks full of them, right? Well, shouldn't that be how you learn the rules? And certainly you do, but there's like social norms and things like that are but yeah, the taking that element of what we used to do before we added the numbers and there's this concept often referred to as alibi, which is the excuse for being able to play pretend, right? Like and I feel like role-playing games, I don't say that this is not entirely what they are, but this is a important element of what they are. Is it gives adults the excuse to get together and play pretend, and I know saying that I don't want to like infantilize the hobby or anything like that. Right. Pretend is a humongous industry. You just have to look at like how much Hollywood makes for movies and things like that. It's like it's an important element of development and going on into adulthood and stuff like that. But like for the thing that we do now, I can't bring stuffed animals to a friend's house. Well, maybe I could bring it to Dan's house. I don't know.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome to. We're a stuffed animal positive house here. So yes, if you ever need that, feel free to drop by Brooklyn. Yeah, right.
I think actually, so this is a very interesting segue here to talk a little bit more about Dread, because Thank you
So
for the
Paul
alert.
will fix
Okay,
that.
should be better now. Apologies for
Okay.
that. Should be better now. Sorry, we dropped the audio. I will run back real quick.
Hopefully, great.
What I was mentioning about
you, guys.
Dread here is that speaking of oral tradition, Dread was brought to us via our friend Rebecca, who has a credit in the book. I think apparently did some artwork for it, and she brought it to our little gathering, and we had a little mini convention gathering that we do every year, or used to before everything went crazy.
Yeah,
and I think was using us as guinea pigs to play the game with, and it was great. It was a great experience. Dan, did you get to play it with Rebecca? I know I certainly did.
I don't think
then.
I did, actually. I don't think I did. I think I would remember the tactile sense of having Jenga blocks on my fingers in the situation. I don't think I ever did. But it's certainly Rebecca's go-to game to this day. So I think it's her favorite way to run a role-playing game, if I'm not mistaken, to this day. And
awesome.
As a very dedicated play group, year after year, and her games get lots and lots of players at our little house convention. So it's a real hit among our close friends.
That's awesome. Yeah,
definitely. Now I'll just say, so for viewers that may not know that, right? So Dread is the horror role-playing game that Epidiah designed, where the primary mechanic is to use a Jenga tower. So when you do need to make a skill check or something that has some amount of risk, you have to take a block out of the standard, Jenga tower or Jenga, analog knockoff, if you will. And if you knock the tower over, your character is out of the game in one way or the other. So a lot of people really feel the physical, tactile tension is really unique. And of course, Epidiah, you won an Ennie award for innovation the year after Dread came out, of course. So it really made a big splash in a lot of circles.
Yeah, that Ennie, in several ways, put Dread sort of on the map. Dread started in, I want to say 2000, might be 99. I was living with co-designer Nat Wood-Elf Barmore. But Nat and I, we were in college at the time, and the first game of Dread, I'm trying to remember, must have been 2000. Sorry, I'm trying to do this brain thing. So we were living. We had it was the two of us and two other roommates, and we just often had these discussions about role playing games and trying to figure out how they work and whatnot. It was a common interest that we had, and Dread sort of arose with that through that experimentation, and it started, as I remember, with the Jenga tower before even the horror got involved in it. We were like, what about replacing dice? And but not with cards. What else? And Jenga tower. And then almost immediately it's like, oh, of course, horror. This feels like horror. And then we wrote some rules for it, and there's quite a bit of rules that that we wrote in the beginning that when we sat down to play, we never used them. The moment we sat down to play, the core mechanic of how the game worked was so compelling, just the pulling from the tower to do things, that the rest of this, figuring out how difficult something is and all of that felt like other role-playing games of the time just got tossed out. We just didn't use it, so we were like, all right, that's fine. Good. And then it took about 5 years to write the game. So it didn't come out until 2005. Mm-hmm. During that time, though, we were playing it we just, every convention we can get to, we were playing it. We were playing it multiple times at the convention, just running playtests, developing it. Again, the core idea of it existed very early on, but there's lots of honing to that, and then just little things like the self-sacrifice rules. So in the game, if you're pulling from the tower, you don't think you can make a pull, you can decide not to, and your character fails at whatever they were doing. And the consequences of that can be anything up to but not including removal of the character from the game, right? So, this gives you a chance to just kind of back away from the tower or whatever. But if you deliberately knock that tower over, you succeed in a dramatically appropriate way, but your character is gone. So this is the blaze of glory. And that one I developed during the game playtest because you just see the impulse in people to do that, right? Like and how to deal with people that got left out of the game, like when the tower fell. This is the thing about me: when I've only played on the player side of Dread a very few times, and I think about 80% of those handful of times, I probably can't even say 80% because probably not even enough times to have an 80%. I'm the first one out. I don't know what it is. I'm not bad at ring gun. I just bad at my own game. But like having rules for how to deal with people who are then sitting at the table afterwards was important because we were running it at conventions, right? People set aside a block of time to play the game, and then we're like 20 minutes into it. Sorry, you got to go.
for our viewers who aren't experts at Dread, what are those mechanics for players that have knocked the tower over but are still at the table?
So there's a few things like we've done ones where it seemed appropriate to have them stick around as sort of like ghosts, if that's appropriate for what the actual thing is. There's another one that's sort of the dead man walking scenario where if it doesn't seem right that it has happened in this moment that this character has died, because like that works well for a number of horror styles, but some horror styles actually having someone just die out of nowhere in the beginning doesn't work yet, right? Like, so for those, you just say, okay, your character, I can now take your character at any point. Like you're a dead man walking, like as far as you know. And one of the things that does is that frees up that player to be the one to create all of the nonsense that somebody in a horror movie does. Like they're like, okay, I'm going to die. Why don't I cause all the trouble that you? Because like in horror movies, people go and do stupid things from the audience's point of view because the audience knows that there's a villain there about to kill, a menace, something out there that wants to kill them that they may not know. When you're playing one, as a player, you know that that's there, and oftentimes you play more conservative than the character would in the fiction. You know what I'm saying? And having this dead person walking situation just lets them go, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna open all the doors. I'm gonna recommend we split the group. I think we should go into that basement. Why don't we go check that out?
I think I was part of that in the last time I played a horror game with our friend Max. Actually, I think I was part of exactly that thing, and you totally want that in that genre. That's really nice. So we were talking. So I think Paul and I, right, are big proponents of fairly rules light systems. When someone tags us with a 400-page rule book, we are not super happy anymore, and we kind of prefer in our gaming more rules light stuff, and kind of that to a large degree that's why sometimes we orbit around early editions of D&D for that reason. And I'm also a big proponent of playtesting heavily, and among the things that I really respect that you just said, Epidiah, was having written stuff in the rules and then playtesting it and then realizing that there are things that just never come up, cutting them out of the rules. And recently I've seen designers on Twitter argue for the opposite of like, well, I'm just going to write something and then I'm going to release it and who cares, and the players will find out what they want to use and what they don't want to use at their table. And before the show started, we were actually talking a little bit about music, and that I've known people in indie bands who got in a cycle of redoing songs over and over again and never releasing it. So if you wrote Dread initially, like around 2000, and you released it in 2005. How did you know it was the right time to release it finally? What finally clicked and said, now it's okay to release the world?
Okay. Well, this one's another dramatic story. I hope you're ready for it.
That's what we're here for. That's why we do this.
So, at the time, I was living in Brooklyn, and I had been dragging my feet on writing that game for a while. Part of what was happening was just that I think, this is me doing some psychoanalysis on younger Epi, who would not appreciate older Epi doing that, but whatever, he's not here. So I think a lot of what I was doing is I just didn't believe that I could write a role-playing game, right? Like we had designed one, it existed, I believed in the product, but I didn't believe in myself in that way. That's a barrier that a lot of anybody trying to break into like a new art form, that I feel like a lot of people do encounter that. It's not an uncommon thing. Partly because like you see these things I have shelves and shelves of role-playing games, and I look at them and I have this vision in my head of what a role-playing game company is, and it's I gotta say, in the 20 years since that, I've learned that vision is wrong, like very wrong on so many levels. And I wasn't living that vision, so I didn't think that it was a thing that could happen or whatever. And then earlier, like just a few months before that, I moved to New York. I moved to Brooklyn, and in Brooklyn, I met Luke Crane, who designed Burning Wheel, and I met a number of people, just like a whole kind of vibrant crowd of people there. I met some friends of mine who went on to be pretty big vegan cookbook authors, and these were people that I'm like, I know these people, and they're doing this thing, right? Like that, like they make it happen by just doing it. So that clicked, and that was a thing that kind of made it possible. But the thing that ultimately made it happen, and this is so bad, so probably around 3 a.m. on a Monday morning, I shot up out of bed, the loudest noise I have ever heard in my entire life. But also, this would have been after about a year of living in Brooklyn. I'd been living in Brooklyn for about a year, so I was like, well, whatever. It's fucking New York. Like, I'm just gonna go back to bed, right? Like, and so I went back to bed, and about 3 or 4 hours later, my roommate is knocking on my door, and she's like, "Epi, I think we've been shot." And I was like, "What?" And I came running out. And in the living room of our apartment, we had this aluminum window frame around the window. There was this hole in it, and chunks of this aluminum window frame and the blinds were all over the room. We'd literally been shot. Somebody had shot our window. We were living on the 3rd floor, and so I called the cops. Yeah. And here's a little tip for those of you in New York. Do what I did. Call 311, call information, and say, hey, listen, this thing happened, I think, like 4 hours ago, so it's not an emergency, so I shouldn't be calling the emergency line, right? So who do I call? They'll patch you through to 911. Information is part of the mayor's office. The police will get the call from the mayor's office, and they will show up. So that's my little life hack for New Yorkers, because they showed up and they were like, "Who do you know in the mayor's office?" And I'm like, they're looking at me like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" So this whole event, this whole morning was like, it was so weird. the police were just completely unhelpful in any way. We went up into the room, and I had that moment. Yeah. We had that moment where they asked if you had any enemies who wished you dead.
Yeah.
And
wow. Oh my God.
That's a thing you don't think about, right? Like, that's a thing that you just like, I'm like, fuck, do I? And there was this just bizarre coincidence where while I was waiting for the police to show up, I was going back and forth in my like this weird emotional state that was going up and down, where I turned on the TV and then just to try and distract myself, and then put it on mute because I couldn't take the noise or whatever. And it was on Comedy Central, and there was some stand-up special going on or whatever. Well, it turns out, and this is just one of the life's weird coincidences, my high school girlfriend had gone to the comedy show that they were airing at that time. And
I did not see this story. This story continues to take turns.
So many turns. Yeah.
Holy crap! Oh, please go on. Sorry. Please go on. I'm wrapped now.
And she has a great infectious laugh. So the camera is constantly turning to her whenever the comedian is making a joke. I later talked to her and found out that what was happening is that she didn't care for the actual comedian, and those were all footage from the warm-up act that she really enjoyed. But nonetheless, so I
don't know where this is going.
I am standing in my living room, and there's this cop asking me, "Do I have any enemies who want me dead?" And I'm like, I don't know. And I look over to the muted television screen, and it's my high school girlfriend laughing. And it is one of the most bizarre moments of my entire life.
That is crazy.
And I think I wrote the majority of that Dread book in the following week. Like, that was just this, like,
wow,
moment of existential, like, I don't know what's going to happen next. I got to get this game out of me, sort of thing. It was amazing. Yeah,
that's amazing.
So when you ask, how did I know it was done? I was done. I mean, I was like, this has got to be done. So
the funny thing, Epidiah, is this has come up. Actually, I think didn't this come up with our last guest, Paul? The same, like something snapped, and they had to write the whole thing. And now I can't remember who it was last time.
We were talking about Dave McGarry making the dungeon board game in like over a weekend.
Yeah. Right. So Dave, likewise, Dave McGarry was like, I think broke up with a relationship as a young man. Was like, I don't know, was not admitted into the army, and also his girlfriend broke up with him, and then over the course of 48 hours wrote the entirety of the dungeon board game one weekend in a fiery rage, I guess.
Yeah.
And somebody else recently told us the same thing, and now you've blown my mind sufficiently that I can't remember, but I feel like in the last 2 weeks someone else said the same thing of like the majority like thing that they're known for was written in about a weekend or so. And I gotta say, and not to make this episode too morose, because we love what we get to do nowadays so much, and we love the friends that have supported us. Is we had one of our best friends, who probably would have been the third person on our projects, pass away at the start of this year, and Paul and I likewise said that this really clarifies that our time is limited, and we need to make the projects that we want to do, like the new show that we're rolling out in a couple weeks, and we really committed to that this week, kind of under the same snap realization in that same kind of mindset, as a matter of fact. So I feel that so much, Epidiah. What an amazing just like couple of hours to sit in your mind like that. That was a thing that prompted you to turn it from something that you'd played for years to something that was actually published out in the world on paper. Amazing. How long?
Yeah,
and so
like, and it's,
so you wrote in a week later, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, like almost all of it in
Wow.
that amount of time.
Wow.
We had the rules, obviously, and so it was mainly just like a lot of the. I often just call it filler text, and I shouldn't say that. The thing about Dread is that it's a game where you could write out all of the rules, like all of them, on 2 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and have room left over for illustrations, right? Like that's the. But it's a almost 200-page book. And one of the reasons why it is that is because that's just what role-playing games looked like at the time. When we made it, we just wanted to both look like a role-playing game and also not look like a role-playing game. The cover of the physical book is very stark because we wanted to keep it. We wanted to make it stand out against the backdrop of like what we saw as very busy covers on other role-playing. Not to complain about those. I love a lot. I mean, like we were just talking about the classic D&D books you have over your shoulder there, Paul, and they have the Errol Otis covers on those two. Just gorgeous. And but like we were. This is 2005, so it was before PDFs, before everyone had a handheld device to read a PDF on. So selling PDFs was still a thing people were trying to learn how to do. So we just thought of it as a physical product that sat on a shelf. So we wanted it to have heft and weight so that people believed in buying it, right? But also drew the eye, which is why it's physically created the way it was. But to have heft and weight, I had to have things to say. And so I had to delve into the genre as much as I possibly could, get as much advice into how to run horror games in there. And then there were the adventures. I didn't write any of the adventures in them. Those were the members of our team at the time. So they have their own stories of whose bullets caused them to write those. But and that was never solved, by the way. In case that needed to be said, we never found out who shot my window.
I figured. I've always liked the graphic design of Dread very, very much. And when I see the cover, right, it looks creepy and it looks unusual, and it definitely stands out. And a lot like the Iron Maiden posters on a friend's wall when you don't know what that is. It feels challenging and scary and creepy and like it's its own thing, and that you kind of have to bolster your courage to get into that. And I think it really attracts mental space because of that. So I think that was a really successful choice.
There's a vital part of my role-playing experience is thinking of role-playing games as forbidden knowledge. So, growing up in the 80s when the Satanic Panic and all that, but also just looking at them, right? They just have that feel to them. And so I don't do that with everything, but like anytime I can, it triggers something in my nostalgia centers, sends the endorphins or whatever chemical nostalgia sends out into your body. For me, I
love that, and I could see that. I'm going to be fighting to not go off on an hour-long tangent on that wonderful and wonderful issue of RPGs as forbidden knowledge. That's a great observation. That totally excites me too.
And I'd say it's not surprising at all to learn that that you think so critically of the presentation and of pushing the envelope of the presentation of role-playing games, because obviously we should talk about and look at Wolfspell, which I'll bring up here and hopefully not lose the audio as I do. Okay, it looks like we're good. Which this is actually not even the picture I wanted to show, which is printed like an LP cover. Where did that come from?
So this is a journey too, but it's not. Nobody gets shot.
Hopefully nobody got shot over this one.
I'm a big fan. Along with being a fan of horror, I'm a fan of sword and sorcery, and again, because of the era that I grew up in, sword and sorcery also meant prog rock and heavy metal, right? Which I often joke about when you at some point go onto YouTube and just Google up whatever songs were popular in the 20s and 30s, because that is what Robert E. Howard was listening to when he wrote Conan. I just want everyone to realize that, like, when we think of Conan, we think of something so very metal or so very epic, you know, like, and no, it was, you know, like it's come to us through several generations and iterations, right? But I had heard an interview with Michael Moorcock, who wrote the Elric stuff and the Eternal Champion stuff, where he talked about he's written lyrics for like Blue Oyster Cult songs and Hawkwind songs, like a bunch of old bands, and so he's, you know, knew these bands, and they, you know, and somebody was asking him about the connection. He said, well, what was happening was that these bands would go on the road, and they would be in these, you know, buses or you know, not, like, they didn't have a lot of money. They would just be in like a VW bus that they had, you know, or whatever, driving from gig to gig, and most of that time is boring. So they just bought books at gas stations, and then when it comes time to write lyrics, what are you going to write about? Well, the only thing you've been doing is reading these books, and that's sort of how that connection came about, right?
Interesting.
But they're intrinsically combined in my head. Like, that's just fun. I said, like, my friend Matt Ross was his name. His older brother was into D&D and metal. Like, I can't not have those two things be the same thing, right? Like, for a long time, I have very little musical ability. I tried forever to be a guitarist, and it is not. I've been booed off stage, so I just want to. That is not a fun feeling, but it's a thing that has happened. So, but I wanted to get this feeling of an album, and so what happened was quite a few years ago, not as many years ago as Dread, obviously, I started doing this sword and sorcery zine called Worlds Without Master. That came about because I feel I've really, now that I'm telling all these stories, I'm starting to realize that maybe my entire career is made out of trauma. So I've wanted to do a sword and sorcery magazine for quite some time, but that's dumb, right? Like, doing a magazine is a fool's errand, economically speaking, right? Like, you're just going to dump money into it. I don't want to say that plenty of people get it and they have it done, but like, I was like, this is a ridiculous thing to try. But then Patreon showed up, right? And I think we all now know what Patreon is. At the time, it was fairly new. And I thought, well, this is a great way to as close to guarantee the budget for each issue as I can, right? And if I know what the budget is, then I can build the issue to be the exact specifications that the budget can allow. I can pay everyone can get like a decent rate, and I can make the magazine, and it can grow if it grows. If I get more patrons, I can do more things with it. Excuse me. At one point, I went in for surgery. I had a hernia. I had some hernia surgery. They gave me some pain meds. And when I was done with those pain meds, I had set up a Patreon and started my first magazine. Somewhere between those two, decisions were made, and they might have been under the influence. And
fascinating.
Yeah, so in the beginning, they're like the covers. If you go onto worldswithoutmaster.com, you can like kind of scroll through in reverse order. You'll find that the early covers aren't illustrated. Like, I have two covers that are the exact same because I couldn't afford. I had interior illustrations, but I couldn't afford cover art. And then the second, and what the makeup of this magazine is, two sword and sorcery short stories, one of which I write in every issue, one sword and sorcery comic in every issue, one sword and sorcery themed role-playing game thing tiny role-playing game experiment, if you will, or whatever. And the first issue had a game called Enter the Avenger that I didn't write, that was someone else, Rafu. It's a great one. But the second one, I was writing a short story for it called One Winter's Dew. And the short story is about these adventurers, these two sisters and their adventuring companions who are reaching retirement age, if you will. They're about ready to stop adventuring. And they come home and they've discovered that their brother has been killed as part of this blood feud that's been kind of going back and forth. And one sister wants to avenge the brother. The other sister wants to respect her sister-in-law's wishes to end the blood feud, to just not continue it. And they both swear oaths to this effect, and they both can't complete these oaths. One of them has to come out, so they go and they try and find a way to do it. And the way they find to do it is that they have transformed themselves and their friends into wolves, because if they kill the people that killed their brother as wolves, the wolves will be blamed and it's over. They've completed their vengeance, but it doesn't continue going. And of course that plan doesn't go doesn't work the way they wanted to, but I won't give anything away. I really enjoyed writing that story. But as I was writing that story, there's this part of my brain, the back of my brain, the game designer part, that's super jealous. And it was like, you asshole, that is an amazing scenario for a game. Why are you wasting it on a story? And then the fiction writer part of me is like, you don't let me have anything. Let me have this, So the compromise I came up with was to publish both in that issue. So I wrote a game called Wolfspell, where you play adventurers who turn yourselves into wolves to accomplish some dire task. And then the sort of arc of that game is to find out if you can become... You become wolves, you run around as wolves, and then at the end you try and see if you can become human again. And I wrote that game, and I wrote that short story, and when I got the artist for the short story, Shellcon, they're amazing. I got them to do the stuff for the short story, and I immediately knew that Shell was going to be my first cover artist. So the issue 4, I think, is the first one that I had a cover artist, and that was Shell. And I kind of developed this working relationship. I published some of their comics in Worlds as well. And then later on, I said, I want to publish a game as an album cover. I've been wanting to do it for a long time. And I just, on a whim, took all the text from Wolfspell and put it into the layout of an album cover, and it turns out that I could do this. And Shell took a scrap of we were at a cafe, and they took out a napkin and just sketched out this album cover, and it was like goosebumps. Like I was like, oh my god! I'm trying to figure out how to do this justice. So it's a trifold album, which means that there's 3 panels to it. And if you look at this one, if you fold it all up, you just see that wolf head howling and the moon and the name Wolfspell, and it's all gorgeous, and I love that. But if you open it up and you follow it from left to right, you see these adventurers. And then in the next panel, you don't see adventurers. You see these footprints that become paw prints, and you see these wolves. And then in the next panel, you see the mountain itself is this wolf. And then, and I don't want to go into all of it, but there are so many hidden wolves in that picture that it's so you can kind of catch them in the mountains in the background, and it's just great. It's beautiful. It's a massive piece of art that Shell did, and they did the interior art too, which is great. There's not a whole lot of interior art because it's mainly the text on the inside, on the other side of it. But it was a dream come true. And then the other bit that doesn't come through with images that I would just want to point out is that there's UV spot gloss on the moon and the Wolfspell thing and the stars.
That's nice.
No,
my
way,
goodness.
dude.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my god. Holy mackerel. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of work that I was very happy to be a part of. Yeah. And
I will certainly say I'll just interject here. The most gratifying moment that I've ever had working in games is to come up with a written idea, and I'm a verbal person. I'm a person of text and the knowledge in the book and so forth, and to turn that over to a talented artist and go, here's some ideas. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, add your twist to it, and for them to come back and just blow my mind with a whole different level of stuff. And you know, and our friend BJ was the person who would do that for me and just blow your mind with a whole different take on it. And I would certainly encourage writers to embrace the surprise that an artist is going to bring a totally different level that you didn't foresee to begin with, and make it a different thing. And for me, that's actually the single most joyous moment in all of game writing myself. It's so great because there's a different, like you were saying, like a different angle. There's different concerns looking at it and trying to figure out how it fits together. And everyone works on it and spends time on it, but the amount of time you spend on something, like if your job is not to think about what this adventurer's belt looks like, right? But somebody else's job is, and that's going to change something. That's going to bring something to what's happening. Yeah. I mean, I picked the belt because it just felt like the most mundane thing I could. But like anything that just like somebody just has to take the moment to go, wait, how would they stand? Right? Like what is the body language of this person in this moment, or and then you're like, oh yeah, I wouldn't have been thinking about that. Because you're focused on other things, and it's just amazing the synchronicity that falls out of that.
And it will feed back in the other direction too, right? Because I've heard so many stories from designers who've written, whether it be rules or adventures or whatnot, based on, I remember this wonderful piece of art, right? I was inspired by this piece of art from an earlier publication, and then I built that out into a whole thing. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
Right? It's amazing.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Will it actually hold a record? And if so, what record do you recommend be kept within?
So it does. It's an actual record album. I had them printed up by a company that, it's a record album jacket. Like there's no records in it.
Crazy.
I had them printed up by a company that's what they print. And I don't own any records. It does. I put 3 CDs in it at one point just to see. But yeah, like I'm a Dio fan, so Lock Up the Wolves. I think that's a nice, good theme to it.
Nice.
I think. That's a good question. At the time when I ran the Kickstarter for it, which was I want to say 2 years ago. I think. No, it was last year. Last year, January. That's close enough. 2 years ago. People were asking me if I was going to get an album in it, and I'm like, I am not a record producer. Like, I can't. Like, oh my god.
Yeah.
I can't take all of that in. But it would have been. I know of bands I would have contacted if I.
Nice.
If I wanted to do it. Yeah.
Nice. We should do, Paul, we should do a whole episode at least and get some guests on the connection between like role-playing games and D&D and music. Because I feel like this keeps coming up over and over again, and it's certainly, a deep vein for me that I don't talk about on the show. And, it's interesting because just recently there was a 5th edition D&D adventure that was printed that was under the name of the Dead Milkmen, and so that like a friend of the Dead Milkmen band wrote a 5th edition adventure and released it as the Dead Milkmen present the lost tomb of the something, right? So there's this surprisingly deep connection between,
I believe it was
music
Lost Tomb of
and-
the Bitch and Camaro, right?
You're right. Yes. Right. Right. There you go.
Right.
Nice.
Which is which is a great song and has a long rambling story in it, and it's just yeah.
Right.
I can't help but think of I'm at this time when not a lot of television is being produced, I find myself going back and rewatching old series that I love, and one of them I've been watching is Bob's Burgers. And there's a great episode where Bob takes his son Gene to a laser show because they're going to close it down.
Yeah.
And it's kind of very 70s prog rock kind of show where they're going to show this laser show for this album that has this very elaborate kind of fantasy setting. And so part of the episode is Bob explaining to his son Gene the intricate backstory behind the album, this weird, sci-fi fantasy concept album. And I couldn't help but think at the moment, like, I missed that. Somehow I missed that era. I never went and saw a laser light show, but everything he's talking about, I was like, I know plenty of people in my history of gaming who were also super into that and who have crossroads there of you can't play D&D without Rush playing or whatever, and I think that's super interesting.
I used to work in a planetarium, actually.
Did you?
No way!
No way! Never had a laser light show, but I worked in a planetarium that was from the 60s. It was like the ball with a big light bulb in the middle that projected it, and then went back to that job after college, and they had gone and made a multi-million-dollar like the Hayden Planetarium style thing, and I got to work with that one too, and that one blew me away. Like that was anyways, and it was fun playing all sorts of prog and metal while rolling the stars around, and that is the benefit of working in a planetarium, is that you get to hang out in a planetarium if you want to.
That's
Absolutely.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Wow. Now I wish I could do that.
I don't know if you can still find them.
I bet you could, because most planetariums, like a lot of colleges, probably have planetariums that they don't use at all.
Yeah.
And you might be able to just be like, hey, can I just pretend that you know how to fix them up? Just tell them, like, I know how to get it up to date, like not like install anything new, but just to make sure everything's aligned. Let me just bring me and my friends in there. But we need a little Floyd playing, a little Led Zeppelin. Otherwise, that's just how you align the stars. It's just how it's done.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Fantastic indeed.
Excellent. Well, is there? We didn't really touch very much, I guess, on the actual game of Wolfspell, like the actual mechanics and the game, and that's something that's definitely when I read it, and it's very interesting to hear you talk about the short story, because now I think what I really need to do is go grab that zine and read the short story as well, because when I was reading the rules, I remember thinking to myself, what's the? I was grasping for media to draw on as inspiration, because I kept asking myself, like, what is the story arc that you tell with this game? Right. What is the adventure that I tell? Because it seems so unusual to me. Like, here's just a basic question: like, if everybody's playing wolves, do we talk to each other?
Yeah. So there's a section in there about communication, like what communication is like. The rules, I think. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's essentially like the wolves are able to communicate with each other. They communicate differently than with barks and with pantomime, and whatnot. You can act that out if you want, but the rules explicitly say, you tell us what you're trying to say. We're not going to try and figure it out from how you're acting. So the main way this game works is it's an apocalypse world hack to some extent, and you've got these two dice. You have the blood die and the wolf die. The blood die represents your I'm going to say human side. You absolutely don't have to have been humans. It could be elves or dwarves or whatever. I think in the game I use the word civilized side in contrast with the wolves. And then the wolf represents your wolf side. And at any time you attempt to do something, you roll the dice and you look to see which one's higher, and that tells you which side is in control at that point. And the further it is from the other one, the more capable you are of doing that, right? So if the dice are close to being tied, you're being indecisive about whether you're a human or a wolf, and it's those areas that are the most dangerous to you. But if you roll like a 6 on the wolf die and a 1 on the blood die, then you can do very wolfy things quite well. And if you roll the opposite, 6 on a blood die and 1 on the wolf die, you can do very human-like things quite well. You can, the way I delineate wolfy from human wolfy. All right. Anyways, I'm going to keep saying it. Is that the wolf side is very open to its instincts and its senses. It's about protecting themselves and the pack and finding food and living the way a wolf would. The human side, they're adventurers, right? So they're going to be able to mold the world based on human ideals of like building things or setting traps or whatever. They're going to be able to think through more intricate plots, but they're also going to be able to throw themselves into harm's way, because that's the ridiculous thing that human adventurers do that wolves don't. Okay. Wolves are smarter than that, right?
Okay.
And you have one stat in the game. Depending on what your background is as a human, you get this specialty bonus that you might consider a stat, but really the only stat you get in the game is this feral score, and the feral score is always added to your wolf die no matter what. So as the game goes on, as that score goes up, you get better and better at doing things like a wolf, but it becomes more and more difficult doing things like a human. And the main way the game works is that you make these characters, and then you turn them into wolves, and then you have there's the move that's Behold the World, which is where you're just trying to rolling observation or give me a perception check, I guess is what it is. But the answers to that, so anytime somebody rolls those, the answers to that kind of moves everything forward. If you're doing the human side, you're gonna ask really strategic. You have a list of questions you can ask, which are things like, who's most vulnerable here? Where should I? I don't know them off the top of my head, but they're very like, I need to figure out what this is. If you roll on the wolf side, you're gonna ask questions like, what can I smell? What does my nose tell me? What do my ears tell me? And a little paragraph explaining how wolf senses work, and so you do that, and that gives the Winter, who's the GM role here, a chance to kind of think of answers that push this narrative forward. So the way the game sort of works is that you have these moments where if you don't know what to do, you either do that, you perceive what's going on in the world, and between the questions that are asked of you, of the GM, and the GM's answers, you get a way of going forward. Or you just hunt because you're wolves and you might be hungry, or you wrestle, which is a thing that wolves do all the time, and it can improve your feral score. But if you're newly born wolves, you're really bad at it, and it could create a whole bunch of trouble that you could then try. Like that ends up being part of the adventure. So you've got that as this sort of in-between balance of figuring out what this is. And at I missed the part at the very beginning where you decide why you're undergoing this spell, and that's the overarching
narrative
conceit, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like, as a group, you decide like, there's a giant, and we hate this giant, and so we're going to become wolves to try and kill this giant, or there's a child that was stolen and taken into the Fae, and as humans we can't go in there, but as wolves we can. So let's do that.
So now you've got me. You got me intrigued. How much research, or how closely did you hew to actual wolf behavior for your rules? Did you do research on that?
I did a lot
that
of
matter
research.
to you? Yeah.
It did. Completely changed what I was doing. And I'm glad I did the research before I wrote the short story.
Okay.
Because what happened is I think I knew that the Alpha Wolf stuff was wrong, but I had not internalized that was wrong. So the Alpha Wolf stuff that we kind of grow up knowing that there's one wolf and he is in charge of the pack and all that behavior, and then there's the Beta Wolf and all that. Even the guy who came up with that later was like, "Oh no, this is wrong. This is my sample size was this group of wolves that were bred in captivity." So one of the joy.
I'm sorry to interject, but that was my next question actually, because of course we may or may not know that there's a particular niche of fiction writing that has a particular controversy going on right these days that entirely revolves around that conceit, entirely revolves around people following wolf conceits of alpha and beta relationships.
Yeah.
And that is and that we do know in fact that that's entirely fictitious. But there is actually a certain niche of fiction writing entirely devoted just to that. So it's interesting to hear from you, Epidiah, that you cared enough to avoid that particular conceit in Wolfspell.
One of the great joys of being a game designer is that once you have a topic, you can justify researching it. So, I was like, I guess
don't say.
to watch a bunch of wolf documentaries.
Yep.
It's work.
Yep.
So that helped quite a bit. I just wanted to find out what it is. I'm a huge fan of Watership Down and the Bunnies and Burrows and things like that came out of that. Just that idea of getting inside the alien mindscape of an animal, right? That thing. And so I kind of wanted to create that sense here in this game. And so and that's part of why these dice do that thing where they're like, I'm now taking all of these options you have before you and constraining them down to the thing that a wolf would think about, right? Or the opposite. I'm going to keep you from thinking like a wolf right now because you're an awkward human inside the body of a wolf.
Super interesting.
I'll just pitch out one of my theses about games is that they're not just about fun. Like a lot of people say, you're having fun, that's all you care about. And one of my personal theses is role-playing games are not purely just entertainment fun, but for me, they should be about learning about the real world. They should be about the opportunity to research and test and play and experiment with learning new things about the real world. And when we had our friend James Mendez-Hose on a number of weeks ago, and we were thinking about different perspectives and racial perspectives, and I brought up the famous philosophy paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And for me, like these fantasy fictions and these fantasy role-playing games should be, at least partly about other things' perspectives and trying to honor them in exactly this way. So I feel that so very much. I'm really glad we managed to sneak that in the episode of
sneak it in literally because we are well over time actually.
Oh no! Sorry.
So I'm gonna call out here, Epidiah. Any final thoughts? Any stuff about Wolfspell you wanted to get in here before we have to say so long?
Well, I have a bunch of these. If people want to buy some, you can get them in PDF form, or you can get them as this glorious album cover. If you go to Worlds Without Master, that's .com. That's Worlds plural, Master singular. You will find them as well as those e-zines that I did. A bunch of that stuff will be there.
Great, and we've posted a link there to that in the chat for folks to follow, and also it'll be in the description text of the video if you're watching this on YouTube.
Definitely. And I think if people wanted the PDF version, you told us that they can get that at Drive-Thru-RPG. But for the lovely, amazing, mind-blowing print version, they should go directly to worldswithoutmaster.com.
Yeah. It's up on other sites too, but that's clearest way to to point people. Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. We love that.
Well, if you viewers have any thoughts about the many topics that we've covered here, life-changing events, inspiring design, role-playing as a feral beast, or from any creature really that has a different perspective, leave us some thoughts here in the comments. And I feel like we've barely touched the vein of a lot of interesting conversations here, and we could clearly go on for hours and hours.
Yeah.
So.
I totally agree. I've been making notes furiously because like about every 5 to 10 minutes there was another just real gem of an idea that should be an entire episode here on Wandering DMs. So there will be more of this subject matter coming up. If you're a new viewer on Wandering DMs, this is the kind of thing that we like to continue doing. Now remember that you can follow, and subscribe to us on social media like Twitter and Twitch, and please follow us here on YouTube and also Facebook. And we are under the handle Wandering DMs, all one word on all of those sites. So please follow us for more content like this.
Yeah. You can also listen to our show in audio-only podcast format if you prefer. Those are available at our website at wanderingdms.com and through various podcast carriers such as Google Podcast and iTunes and Spotify. If you are listening to us through one of those other carriers, please take a moment to rate and review us there. That helps other folks find our show, and we really appreciate it.
We very much do. Also, our upcoming big premiere, Paul just uploaded the first episode in the last couple of hours, as a matter of fact, for The Big Bad, our tournament D&D show with celebrity players playing through the same scenario week after week, will be released Tuesday, October 13th. So please, if you haven't subscribed on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube and you'll get notifications on when The Big Bad actually gets released on October 13th. Big thanks, I got to say, to all of our patrons on Patreon who support this show and interviews like we have with guests like Epidiah, which are just incredibly invaluable, and our upcoming show. If you would like to join our supporters, please visit patreon.com/wanderingdms. And if you do that, then you'll have access to a private Discord server that we have just for patrons, and you'll be able to join Paul and myself in live voice chat at the premiere of The Big Bad on October 13th. So we hope that you will join us there, and we would really enjoy speaking with you then. And we usually have a half-hour chat after the talk show, as a matter of fact. So right after the show ends here, we'll get over on Discord and chat with some of our patrons about some of the threads that Epidiah threw at us today. So we hope you'll do that.
Yeah.
What else, Paul? What else do we have coming up this week?
Isn't that enough? Surely that's enough.
Of course that's enough. Sure. But okay, so if you enjoyed the group therapy session that myself and Paul and Epidiah just had on this show, there's more of that kind of thing Tuesday night when Paul and I have our weekly therapy session about the making of The Big Bad, Tuesday at 8. And in fact, that's going to be the last one as we reveal how the scoring went. We haven't told anybody how the scoring went, but that's the last Dev Diary therapy session this Tuesday where we'll reveal how the show actually gets scored. And then, of course, Paul has the 10 Dead Rats live action on Thursday. And then we will be back for another episode of the talk show next Sunday at 1. Epidiah, thank you so much. This is one of my favorite interviews that we've had on the show. Thank you so much. I hope that we can get you back someday to follow up on some of these threads that I love so much.
This was a joy. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Excellent.
Awesome. So look for all that and subscribe on YouTube, and we will see you next Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, for another thought-provoking discussion.
We'll see you then.